This is the final video in the discussion of financial liquidity, and this one considers something called asset structure. Now, just for definitional purposes, the asset structure is simply equal to current assets divided by total assets. Okay? So if you look at the spreadsheet, current assets are 418, 984, and total assets are 1772228. So let's come down here and put that into the spreadsheet. It's equal to current assets divided by total assets. Okay, so it says that 24% of the assets that the farm owns would be in the category of current. In other words, it'd be cash, accounts receivable, crops in storage, and market livestock, and things that we consider current. So what does that number tell me? Well, think about that. That number is going to be small if the farm has ownership of quite a large dollar value of non-current assets. In other words, land, machinery, buildings, and breeding stock. So if you get a small asset structure, you pretty well can assume that the farm owns a lot of non-current assets. And of course, the big one in that category is usually land. The other thing that can make that asset structure small is that if you have crops in storage and market livestock, if prices are down for those types of items, in other words, if the price of corn and soybeans in storage are low, if the price of steers and heifers were low, it would also make that asset structure low. If that asset structure is a large number, that's also a bit of a hint as to the characteristics of the farm. For example, what if a farmer rented most of his farm machinery and rented most of his farm land? Then you would expect that asset structure to be a large number because the farmer would not have items listed in the non-current assets category. So if a farmer didn't own his land, he didn't own his machinery, then he doesn't have a lot of non-current farm assets. So when you look at the current assets, they would be a much higher percentage of the total assets. So if I'm a lender and I'm evaluating a farmer, and if I look at that asset structure and that number's fairly low, then I'm going to immediately guess that he owns a lot of non-current assets, which means he probably owns a lot of land and he probably owns some machinery. However, if I look at that asset structure number and that number is really quite high, in other words, almost approaching 1, it's going to be a hint to me that he doesn't have many non-current assets. For example, what would asset structure look like for a rancher who was buying steers, putting some weight on them, and then reselling them? So he doesn't need much machinery, and maybe he leases one tractor just to move hay around. Maybe he's doing all that grazing on rented land. So the main thing he has as an asset is those steers he buys for resale. Well, asset structure would be a number very close to 1 because almost all of his assets would be current assets. So the asset structure can give you a pretty good hint as to the kind of the categorization of current assets and non-current assets. So it can be a good indicator to a lender, for example, of what type of assets a person owns, especially if they're applying for a loan. Then the lender begins to have some idea if they own some land, if they own some machinery, if they own some breeding stock, and so forth.